Hello, good morning, and welcome to my series on exploring cognitive biases. And today we're going to be talking about reactance. Big shout out to everyone who's watching this back on the replay. If you are watching on the replay, let me know in the comments, where are you watching? Are you on YouTube? Are you on my page? Where are you watching from? And when are you watching? It'd be great to have an understanding of where you guys are all coming from so that I can tailor my content to you. Good morning, Tristan. It was great watching your video this morning, and thanks for coming and joining mine as well. So hello to everyone who is watching on the live. I'm not going to sit here and give it a moment for people to join in. I'm just going to dive straight into it. So reactance bias, that's what we're talking about today. Okay, we're leaving now. How many have you or other people how many times have you said this or heard other people saying this to their kids as the kid isn't getting ready? Good morning, James Chisholm. So the kid's not getting ready and you need to go. Good morning, Lucy. And you say to them, or you hear someone say to the kids, okay, well, we're leaving now. Have fun. And then the kid quickly hurries up and rushes to come and not be left behind because they don't want to miss out. That's kind of a way that you can use this bias to your advantage. In fact, there's a lot of ways that you can use this bias to your advantage as a parent, but it's also a bias that really trips you up and gets in your way as a parent. But it's not just for parents. So what is reactance bias? Reactance bias is a natural desire that we all have to want to have freedom to make our own choices. Okay, simple as that, really. So if someone tells us to do something, there's a part of us that naturally wants to rebel and do the opposite. You may have heard of demand avoidance. This is an extreme version of this, and it's particularly prevalent with people on the spectrum, so with ASD, etc., where they avoid demands. So if they feel like they're expected or have to do something, they're less likely to do it, and they're going to feel uncomfortable at the idea of doing it. That's an exaggerated version of reactance bias. So we all have this bias. We all have this tendency to want to rebel when we're told something. I'm not going to name names. I was hoping that someone would be watching today, this morning, who would completely understand this, because they are a great example that if you tell them to do something, you can pretty much guarantee their gut reaction will be to do completely the opposite, because they don't like being told what to do. And that's true of kids, but it's also just as true for us as grown-ups as well. So here's a quote. Here's a brilliant quote from Baltasar Gracian, some old Spanish dude. Don't take the wrong side of an argument just because your opponent has taken the right side. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation a few days back with a friend of mine who had kind of done this. So they'd found themselves in a debate on Facebook. Always a great place to find cognitive biases at play is Facebook debates. And this person that I'd been speaking to had effectively ended up kind of supporting an argument they didn't fully embrace and believe in, but didn't realize that until afterwards, just because they'd got so sucked into the argument. And Sharon, morning, sounds like Cara would. Yes, absolutely. Desperate to just not do anything they've been told to do. But we all have this to some extent. Just different people will respond and react to it differently. For some people, it will be more obvious. For some people, they will have a better handle on it and be more self-aware of it. And we're very good. It's a very tricky bias, because it's one that we're very good at finding justifications for outside of the actual bias itself. So here's another great example of this bias at play. Back in '97, there was an outbreak of mad cow disease. I'm sure most of the people watching this video will remember mad cow disease, or BSE, wasn't it, the actual title for it. And so basically it's a disease that you could contract from eating beef. If you were eating infected beef, that could transfer the BSE or CJD, as it was in cattle, into BSE, which is the human form, and then you can get very ill. Anyway, yes, it all ties in with the BPD. Thanks, Sharon. I didn't want to say that out loud, but of course she's quite open about it. Good morning, Stephanie. So yeah, BSE broke out. There was this outbreak, and one of the things that the government did to curb the spread of the disease was to outlaw T-bone steak. So T-bone specifically because it comes from very close to the spinal column, and that's where it's more likely that BSE will be transferred through into the meat from the bone. So for that reason, they outlawed T-bone steak. When they did that, there were protests. There were groups of people who would go out in public to specific public places and sit and tuck into a lovely T-bone steak. Was that a sensible choice? Does that choice make sense? What do you think in the comments? It's not a very logical choice, because there's a huge risk of contracting an illness. But these people that were protesting against it, it's possible that they didn't believe that risk existed. It's likely that they had downplayed the risk of that disease and that illness, the chance of them catching it, etc., etc. But there's a good chance that most of that would have happened as a justification for the way that they were thinking and what their desires were. So they would have had a desire to go against what they were being told to do. So the government says, no, for your own safety, we're putting this restriction in place. And the gut response and the first reaction that a lot of people would have to it is to go, what? You can't take away my freedom. How dare you tell me what I can't do? That makes me want to do it more. And so as a result, they then justify and they play down the threat, and they convince themselves that that's what they believe and that it's safe to go out there and eat this meat to make a point. Now, any parallels to current situations, obviously, clearly for you to make your own minds up. But we all have this natural tendency to want to avoid having our freedoms taken away and being told what we can and can't do. So you can use this to your advantage, though. And anyone who's got kids probably already has used this to their advantage to some extent. For example, you want your kid to finish dinner, but they've slowed down and they're not really, and they're playing with their food, and they just want dessert, right? But you want them to eat their fish fingers. They've still got some chips left as well. So you say to them, well, just make sure you finish your chips, and you can leave the fish fingers. And the child is then more likely to eat the fish fingers than they are the chips, because that's what they've been told. So a really useful, the thing is, you have to be careful, especially with kids, because they're not stupid. They will catch on to that manipulation, this reverse psychology. Effectively, reverse psychology in part comes from this bias. But kids aren't stupid. They will catch on to that very quickly. But with someone with demand avoidance, Sharon, you might want to listen up to this part. With someone that has severe demand avoidance, one of the best ways that you can get around this is by always offering a choice. So instead of, and I know, Sharon, I said you should pay attention. I'm using examples where I'm talking about young kids just because it's easier, but I'm sure you can find ways to apply this in your situation. So instead of saying, right, come on then, let's get your shoes on, we've got to go, you could say, okay, should we put our shoes on first or our coat? Then you're not really questioning whether or not the shoes or the coat are going to be put on, but you're giving them the choice to decide which they're going to do soonest. which they're going to do first. So they feel like they're in control and it's their choice, because it's their decision which they do first. But the implied result is that they're going to do both anyway. Particularly if you do the same, so you put what are we going to do first, and you put your shoes on if they choose shoes, or you put your coat on if they choose coat first, then you're working with them rather than just expecting them to do something for you. So these are examples of how you can get around it. You used to ask them to eat just 3 more. They then eat 3 more, and they say, oh, I didn't see, do it again. Works a few times, brilliant. And the thing is, it will work a few times, but it gets old quickly, doesn't it? Which is why I suggest doing things with them. So there's some practical tips for others, but of course the whole point of this series is to look at what we can do for ourselves. Understanding these biases allows us to be more aware of them, and simply by being more aware of them we can be ready and on the lookout for them, so we can notice them. So if you find yourself in a situation where your first instinct, or what seems like your gut potentially, is telling you that you want to avoid doing that, you want to ignore that, you want to do exactly the opposite of what you've just been told to do, pause for a moment and decide if that's really the choice that you want to be making, or if you're just playing into this bias. So Stephanie, thanks for the comment, says, some folks are just natural rebels and will eat steak just because they can. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I'm here today to learn a bit more about brain links. Thank you very much, Stephanie. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Some folk are just rebels and will eat steak just because they can, or whatever the scenario or situation may be. And that's okay. Look, we can't control what other people do, but what we can control is the way that we react and respond to it, and the choices that we make. So just because someone else is out there eating steak doesn't mean we need to eat steak. If we think that they're likely to contract CJD from doing so, I was trying to be clever and liken it to a different situation, but never mind. Then we have the choice of whether or not we share in that person's company, whether or not we choose to eat a meal that they've prepared, etc., etc. So yeah, look at how you can use it for yourself and what you can do for you. And that's pretty much it. That's what reactance is all about. It's a kind of a form of reverse psychology. It's wanting to do the very opposite of what you've been told to do. Sarah Higgs, because I can. Yeah. So Sarah, you're a great example of this. If I tell you you can't do something, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to do that thing, right? So Sarah, whatever you do, don't pay me the money you owe me today. But in that example, it's far too transparent that I'm doing it intentionally. And so although I may be saying that, someone like Sarah is smart enough to see right through that. I mean, to be fair, it doesn't take much. But straight away, it's obvious that actually what I'm really asking for is the thing I want you to do. And therefore, now you feel like that I'm trying to manipulate you into it. You're even less likely to do it than if I just told you not to. See, I just said you can't, and Sarah's response, I can do anything. Shut your mouth. Exactly. And yes, Sarah, you have missed the best bits, but don't worry, because you can watch it back on the replay, either here on my YouTube channel or my Mind Affinity Facebook page. Okay, so that is today's video. That's what reactance bias is all about. And for a change, I've actually been more prepared, and I can tell you already, next week we're going to be talking about impact bias. So if you want to understand more about what impact bias is and how it all works, which is basically we have a tendency to overestimate the intensity and the duration of an emotional reaction or response to a situation. That may not make a lot of sense. So tune in next week where I'll explain it in a lot more detail. Thanks everyone for listening, for watching, and for taking part. And I will see you all next week, Thursday, 9 o'clock, same place, same time, with a new bias. Thanks.